Clawland here with episode 3 of Left Hand Reviews, and today we're going to talk about an awesome game, and it's terribly underappreciated in my opinion, Tribune. Tribune was released in 2007 by Fantasy Flight Games. Plays 2 to 5 players in approximately 2 hours, but as little as 60 minutes depending on the victory conditions that you choose, which I'll get into in a couple minutes. There was also an expansion that came out the following year, 2008, that adds an additional player, so it will play up to 6 players, and some additional victory conditions, an additional board, and in my opinion, it's a great buy. Fantasy Flight every year has this game on sale during their holiday sales, and it is a killer deal if you can pick it up. I think I got the game and the expansion for $35 or $40 a couple years ago, and don't regret it for a minute. It is an awesome game. Primarily worker placement and card drafting. There's a lot of little rules going on, but in essence, it's not the most complicated of games. It's just several different rules. But the in-game player aids and player mats do a fantastic job of keeping you on track and reminding all players of the rules. So let's get into it. Let me set up a game, and I'm going to go through most of the rules. Don't lynch me if I forget a couple, but let's take a look at it. So Tribune comes in a slightly larger box. It's a little even bit bigger than a Ticket to Ride style box, which kind of makes it funky to fit on your shelves. But let's open it up and take a look. Do keep in mind that the expansion does fit in this box. I took all the expansion components out before shooting the video here because I'm not going to get into the expansion today. We'll use that for a future video. So the first thing that we have here is a great quick start guide. So after you know the rules, this is a great way to just quickly brief yourself or any new players on the rules so you don't forget anything. Excellent. We have a very nice full-color, glossy rule book here. Explains everything in great detail. And what is also great is it has little blurbs. Since this takes place during Roman times and has a lot of Roman words and Roman factions, such as the gladiators and so on and so forth, it has little blurbs here about each of the areas where you can place workers. Just little historical examples of what these were during the Roman time period, which is kind of a neat little addition. They didn't need to do that, but it kind of helps immerse you in the theme of the game. A very nice quadruple fold board here, which I'll open up in a minute. Here's the various player aids and player mats. These are where you store your chits that you collect during the game, but they also have cheat sheets for each of the areas that you can place your workers, and we'll get into those in a minute. One for each of the colors. Also, it's of note that this is a pretty good insert. It was not designed for this particular game, I can tell because of some of these extra spaces. But these fit right in here, but I found them really difficult to get out without kind of bending them, so I cut a little notch here with an X-Acto knife, and it makes it really easy to pull them out. So I'm a little OCD on that. We also have some faction chits here. Here's all your meeples. These are an oversized, large meeple. So you'll be placing these workers on the various places on the board. You have a very nifty little cardboard chariot here. And actually you can see there's a second one that came, just in case, I guess, if this one gets damaged. It does connect together, but I had to glue it just so the chariot didn't keep coming apart from the actual horses. Some thick cardboard money here, various denarii, as the currency is called. We have our objective cards here. I'll get into these in a minute. These are oversized, kind of tall, skinny cards. Anybody who's played Caesar and Cleopatra, the 2-player Cosmos game, will be familiar with this size card. I believe Mayday, maybe Mayday, but definitely Fantasy Flight, of course, does make sleeves for these. I haven't sleeved them just because then they won't fit into the box right, but you may think about sleeving. These are all the various faction cards. You can see there's a big old stack of them here in all the various faction colors, and I'll get into their use, of course, in a minute. we have more chits here. These are the favor of the gods and the tribunes and the scrolls. The more chits here. Now, of course, I forgot what these are called. And we have our laurels here, some more chits, and we'll get into those as well. And then finally, this nifty little wooden first player token. So let me set up a game and we'll take a look at how it is played. Now the first phase of the round is placing of the cards. So you have your stack of shuffled cards here, and you're going to place them as follows. One card face up in each of the 2 spaces in Thermae. One face up in each of the 6 spaces of the Forum Romanum. You're going to place one face down in the latrine. Now you're going to be placing face up in the curia until the sum equals 5 or greater. Or if a leader, which is the 0 cards, comes up, that immediately stops placement as well. So that's a 6, so that stops. 2, 4, 6, so that stops there. In the auctionorium, you're going to place 3 face down. In the catacombs, you'll place 5 face down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pantheon, you'll place 1 face down. And that's the initial placement of the cards. Now you'll notice, it's kind of nifty, what they did here is the light colored spaces are where you place cards face up, whereas these ones are a little bit darker of a color, you place face down, just to kind of help remind you. Next in player order is the placement of your followers. So I kind of have it set up for a 2-player game here, but depending on the number of players will determine how many followers that you have. More players is fewer followers. The starting player will start off with 11 denarii, and subsequent players will start off with 13 denarii, 14 denarii, 15, and so on as the player count increases. And that's to combat the advantage of playing first. So the first player will place one of their followers anywhere on the board. Any of these circles is where, or squares in this case, you can place followers. You can also place followers up here in the coin bowl and followers up here on the factions. And I'll go through each of them in a minute. So red may go there, and then yellow, and so on and so forth. So let me explain what each of these do, because after all the followers are placed, you'll then evaluate all the regions. So when you place a meeple here in the Thermae, you are agreeing to pay 1 denarii to take this card, or here 1 denarii to take this card. Here in the Forum, you are agreeing to pay 3 denarii to take the card. In the latrine, what you will do is when the regions are evaluated, you will flip the card, and your option is either to pay the value of the card in denarii to take it, so in this case you'd pay 2 and take this card, or you can receive its value in denarii from the bank. So I could not take this card and instead take 2 denarii from the bank. This can be very useful if you have some very high value cards like 7, 8, 9, 10, and you can get all that money for free from the bank. Now here in the curia, you will place a follower, and what that means is you must discard a card from your hand and you can take the entire stack. So in this case, you'll get 3 cards by just discarding a card from your hand. The first person to place on the auctionorium will flip 2 of the 3 cards over. When a second person places onto the auctionorium, the 3rd card is flipped over. Now when this region is evaluated, it is a closed hand bid of denarii for all 3 cards. So red and yellow will each take some denarii from their pile, closed hand bid, reveal at the same time, and whoever has the larger amount takes the cards, all 3 cards. But they are giving their denarii to the losing player. So if you notice that somebody may be collecting a specific color, you can fake them out and say, you know that they want to bid a lot to make sure that they do get those cards. You bid 0, all of a sudden they're giving you a ton of their denarii. If a player does not put a second meeple there, so there's only the 2 face-up, then in this case the yellow player would pay 1 denarii to the bank and take the 2 face-up cards, and the third one will get discarded. In the catacombs, what you're going to do is you can place a follower in either the 2, the 3, or the 4 spot. When that region's evaluated, it'll first evaluate the 4, and then the 3, and then the 2. So placing it higher, on a higher number, will give you first pick at the 5 cards here. But you pay 4 denarii. So what will happen is whoever is on the 4 will pick up the cards, look through them, and choose 1 card and pay 4 denarii for it. Then they will place the cards back. The person on the 3 will pick up the remaining cards and buy 1 for 3, and then the person on the 2 will pick up the remaining cards and pay 2. So that's a great way to get a cheap card. You just throw yourself on the 3 or the 2, or if you need a specific card and you're really hoping it's in there, you can place on the 4. When those are purchased, the denarii, instead of going to the bank, denarii is placed here in the catacombs, and that will matter in a minute. Now the Pantheon, that is a way to get an eternal favor of the gods, which is this token here. Now what you must do is place a meeple here. You must first have a Vestal Virgin's marker on your player board, denoted by this symbol on there, and I'll get into how that's done in a minute. And you get to look at this card. And what you must do is discard a card of the exact same color from your hand, and if you do, you obtain an eternal favor of the gods token. If you do not have that color, then too bad for you, you just wasted a follower placement. And finally, we have the Field of Mars down here. Field of Mars is how you get these great little laurel tokens. Now the laurels, what you have to do is discard a pair of cards. So it's expensive. So if you discard a pair of cards, you get 1 laurel. Now if if there are multiple players that play there, whoever discarded the higher pair, meaning you add the values of the cards together, so in this case if I discarded this pair, it'd be a 5 and a 2, so that would be a value of 7. If I discarded the highest pair, I get an additional laurel as a bonus. And if you're the only player to place there, then you get the bonus by default because, of course, you're the only one there, so you're therefore the highest. So that's how you get your laurels. Now I also mentioned the coin bowl. The coin bowl, the first player to place a meeple there gets 7 denarii immediately. And that's important immediately because you may be placing followers here on the board but not have the money for them. So you can also place at the coin bowl, which you receive the money immediately before the regions are evaluated. Every additional meeple that gets placed on the coin bowl just gets 5. And you can place as many meeples there as you choose. And finally, you can place your followers onto the faction spaces. And this is how you indicate that you're going to try to take over a faction. The first player to place on a faction space places it on the 1. And if anybody chooses to compete against you, they place on the 2. So once all meeples are played, and all followers, sorry I'm using those words interchangeably, you will then evaluate all the regions, starting 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Once all of the card spaces are evaluated, you are then going to evaluate the faction takeovers. After the faction takeovers have completed, then you will do the faction benefits. So each person that controls a faction gets a benefit. And then finally, you will auction off the amazing little chariot here. So why are you doing all this? Well, the purpose is to get the victory conditions. Now let me explain that. There are several different victory condition cards. This is the Carpe Diem card. There's also the Alia Iacta Est card. And before the game starts, everyone will agree on a victory condition card. You can see the cards have a little hourglass, green, or yellow, and red. That indicates how long the game will last. So you can choose a short game victory condition card, a long game, medium game, depending on the skill level of the players and how long you want to play, which I think is an awesome little mechanic. So let's take a look at the Carpe Diem one. Now here it tells you with 4 players you have to achieve 4 victory conditions. With 3 players, 5 of the victory conditions, or with 2 players, 6. And each of these on here is a victory condition. So a victory condition of having a Tribune, having a favor of the gods, having 3 legions, having 8 laurels, having 4 faction markers, and having 30 denarii. So in the case of 2 players, once somebody has all 6 of these, or say I was playing with 4 players, once one of the 4 players has any 4 of these, they call Vini Vidi Vici, and everyone has until the remainder of the turn to also get the number of victory conditions required. If they're the only person, they win. If 2 people happen to get victory conditions at the end of that same turn, which does happen, then it will come down to points, and all the various things are worth certain numbers of points, and it comes down to a point victory. So, how do you get all these different victory pieces? Well, I already mentioned the laurels. Now, what about all the other ones? So let's talk about how to take over factions, because we're collecting these cards. Why are we collecting cards? So during the faction takeover phase, if you have a meeple on the number 1, you're going to attempt to take over that faction. What you must do is play cards from your hand of that particular color. So if we're going to attempt to take over the gladiators, we need to play a minimum of 2 orange cards to take over the gladiators. So I may play these 2 5s. I'll place them here next to my player board, indicating that I've taken over the gladiators. I take a gladiator faction marker, which is one of the victory conditions, and place it on my player board. Now when I take over a faction, I get a benefit, which is listed on the card. And this one says for the gladiator benefits, the takeover benefit is 1 legion. So I collect a legion, place it on my player board here. So now I have 1 of the 3 legions required for that particular victory condition. Now let's say somebody already controls the gladiators. So later on in the game, yellow wants to take the gladiators over. So they place there. What they must do now is either play more cards than the player that currently holds control. So in this case, they could play any 3 gladiator cards. Doesn't matter what the value is. Or they can play fewer or equal number of cards that have a higher value. So I could play any 3 cards, or I could play, say, 2 cards that have a value of 12, because that would be greater than the value of 10. If I succeed in taking that faction over, I would get the faction token here, place it on my player board. I would place the cards that I use to take over the faction next to my player board now. The old cards are discarded, and I now get the faction takeover benefit of 1 legion. Now it's important to note that factions will crisscross hands a lot during the game. The player that did have control of it will not lose their faction takeover token. So they keep that. So in essence, there's not a huge downside to losing a faction, except for the fact that when you control a faction, you do get a faction benefit. So again, remember, you get benefits when you take over the faction, and you get benefits by maintaining control of the faction. Now I said here somebody can contest you for the faction. In that case, the player who placed on the number 2 will reveal the cards that they're using to take over the faction first. Then the player 1 can see if they can beat what player 2 put down. If they can, they place their cards down, Player 2 loses the battle. They take their cards back into their hand, but they must discard one of those cards that they attempted to use to take over the faction. So in other words, if you're going to contest a takeover, you better make sure that you can win, or else you will lose a card. Also, when you're the first person to take over a faction, you get this handy-dandy laurel. This is a one-time thing for each of the factions. So being the first person to grab up a faction gets you a laurel, which again is one of those victory conditions. Now, how about those faction benefits? Well, after all the faction takeovers have been completed and everyone who's taking over a faction gets their takeover benefit, you will then go through the faction benefits. And those are listed here on the player sheets. So first we say, who has control of the gladiators? If you have control of the gladiators, you have the choice of getting all the denarii out of the catacombs, which is very nice, or you can pick up a new card and an assassin. That means draw a card, goes in your hand, or you can assassinate a card, or I'm sorry, in this case a card and an assassin. Now what an assassin does is allows you to kill off the highest value card of an opponent's faction, which thus makes it easier for that faction to be taken over later in the game. So that's kind of a nasty thing. If you know that you want to, say, take over the plebeians, you assassinate an opponent's highest plebeian card, which makes it easier for you to take them over. Now with the legates, you can take a scroll, which is this here, or you can take a card and purchase a legion. So you would pay a certain amount of denarii to then purchase an additional legion. And I'm not going to get into the cost. The Praetorians, your benefit is to get a legion. So you just take another legion. The plebeians, you can get one card and 2 denarii, or you can get a tribune. A tribune is probably the most difficult victory condition item to get in the game. So in the case of the Carpe Diem, you may not be going for that because it's not required. But in some of the victory condition cards, a tribune is required. And being that it's difficult, there's a lot of competition for it. So what this is saying is, in order to get a tribune, you must have a scroll and control of the patricians. So you must have already had a scroll, have the plebeians taken over, and also have the patricians under your control. Now that doesn't mean to have a patrician faction marker. That means you must currently have control, meaning you have the cards next to them indicating that you have control. In that case, you flip over your scroll and you now have a tribune. Congratulations. Now for the patricians, the benefaction benefit is to get the proconsul figure. The proconsul figure is an additional follower that you get to place every turn. An awesome thing to have. Now the Vestal Virgins, you can get temporary favor of the gods and 1 laurel, or they are the other way to get a tribune. You must have control of the Vestal Virgins and the senators, and you can flip a scroll over to a tribune. And with the senators, you can have a scroll, or you can take 2 cards. So what's the difference between the temporary favor of the gods and the eternal favor of the gods? The eternal favor of the gods, which you get here at the Pantheon, you have forever. The temporary favor, if you lose control of the Vestal Virgins, you give up that temporary favor of the gods. So keep that in mind. So, after we've evaluated the cards, we've evaluated the faction takeovers, then everybody who has a faction gets their faction benefit, and you can have multiple factions at a time. You're not just limited to one. Then you do the chariot auction. This is a closed fist auction between all players. Everyone takes some denarii from their bank, they hold their hands out, everyone reveals at the same time, and whoever has the most money places that money into the bank, and they get the chariot. And what they can do with the chariot is place it on a faction that they already control, or they may place the chariot off the board. So what that means is when they place a chariot on a faction they control, it prevents that faction from being taken over next turn. Or when they place it off the board, they're essentially preventing another player from preventing their faction from being taken over. So say you really want those patricians for that proconsul figure, and you want to outbid blue, whoever has the patricians, you outbid them for the chariot, so you can place it off to the side so they can't protect their patricians. Now that's pretty much it. One additional thing is the leader cards. If you take over a faction using a leader card, they have a value of 0, but you get a special ability. So if you take over the gladiators, you would get 1 legion, but you also get the special ability of an additional legion because you use the leader card. So I'm not going to go over all the different factions takeover benefits, but all the faction takeover benefits are different, just like all the faction owning the faction benefits are different. But the Vessel Virgins will give you 5 denarii. The Vessel Virgin leader will give you an eternal favor of the gods, which is awesome. Your senators here will give you a laurel when you take them over, and so on and so forth. So like I said, after all the cards are taken, or after the end of the round, you will remove all the cards that were not claimed, and the new round starts by placing more cards. When you run out of cards, you simply shuffle them, shuffle the discard into the draw deck, and keep going. Woo! Holy smokes, did you get all that? Clear as mud? Yeah, I know it sounds complicated, but it's really not. You take 2 rounds, 2 plays through a whole round or a whole phase, and it's easy. There's a lot going on in this game. That's why I love it so much. I love the variable ways to win. You can choose a different card depending on how long you want to play. Somebody may be going for denarii. Somebody may be going for legions and laurels. There's so many different ways to win. There's so many paths to victory. I love it. And it's balanced so well that many times several players will achieve that victory condition and be screaming out Vini Vidi Vici at the same time. So, awesomely fun game. It is a worker placement at heart, as you can see. I love worker placement games. It's got excellent components. You wouldn't expect anything less from Fantasy Flight. And there is an expansion. Holy smokes. Can you believe it? The expansion adds another player board. It adds another game board. It adds more victory condition cards, more chits, more cards. It's insane. But I'm going to go over that in a later review. So what do you think? I definitely think this is an incredible buy. Grab it up from Fantasy Flight next time they have a sale. Trade for it. It is an awesome game. It's way underloved. Recently brought this to a game meetup. It was a huge hit for everyone, and they've asked to play it again. So I'm happy about that. So if you haven't had a chance to play it, please do. It's a great game. And thanks for watching.